Welcome to Alienating the Audience, a show that explores the deeper side of science fiction. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton, the thinking man's nerd. And today, we are going to explore how science fiction portrays religion. Grab a space Jesuit and a cybernetic kippa, and let's go! One of the things I love about the sci-fi community is that I find it to be a very open, very tolerant, very inviting community. And this podcast is no different. So even though we're talking about religion today, which I know can be a touchy subject for people, regardless of where you're coming from when you're listening to this podcast, if you were a extremely materialist, atheist skeptic, or you're an extremely religious Southern Baptist, everybody's welcome. We're all friends here. We're all in for a fun, good chat. Nobody's under attack. Nobody listening to this should feel like their things that are important to them are under fire. We're all buddies here. And the people that I have on, I think, would agree with that. Yonatan Huber, you're coming to us from Israel. You're in Tel Aviv?
Yes, I'm in Tel Aviv in my nice apartment. And I would preface by saying that I, myself, am an observant Orthodox Jew. Uh-huh. So I think I represent the feelings of the observant religious people, although, I don't know, maybe Christians would feel that me being Orthodox Jew. But I'm coming from a position, let's say.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think that that's relevant to point out to the conversation that we all have our predispositions that we come to religion with, regardless of whether we are religious or not. Very very few people, particularly once they're in their 20s and 30s, just are completely neutral on the concept of religion or God. We usually have opinions, and so you're representing an observant Jew, which is wonderful. And Jennings, who is a frequent guest on the program, frequent collaborator, you and I used to go to the same church. You're Eastern Orthodox.
That is correct. We did, and I am indeed still Eastern Orthodox, Orthodox Christian.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I am an apostate. I am even though I was the one handing you Jennings packets of evangelical material and whatnot. I went all Count Dooku on you and left the church, and I'm an apostate now. So I am coming at this from a perspective of we could either put me in the category of friendly agnostic or very secular Buddhist. One of those two.
I have, by the way, been sent by the Orthodox Council to fight you with a lightsaber.
That's, man, every week. You know what? If anybody's bored and they want to see some good photos, Google Orthodox Jedi, because there's some guy that periodically gets pictures of Orthodox bishops and monks and just adds lightsabers to them. It's really delightful. And
yes. One of my favorite D&D tropes was there was a series of pictures describing, the various classes and etc. Whoever doesn't understand me, never mind. But there was a picture of a bunch of nuns with hunting rifles, and it said lawful good and violent about it. And it was excellent. It was superb. It was...
Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, so we're going to talk about how science fiction approaches religion today, and I'm going to kick it off to you, Yonatan, because you and I were speaking last week, and you had a really interesting thesis to how sci-fi approaches religion. You did not think that it was just a straight up or down religion is good or bad. You thought it was more complicated than that. So walk me through your thesis.
Yes. So my thesis is based on me watching a lot of sci-fi and reading a lot about religion. So I'm a sort of theology hobbyist of all religions, and a sci-fi enthusiast.
Right.
So my the thesis that I developed was that there are two approaches in science fiction to religion, and they are not religion is good or religion is bad. It is whether religion is a sort of childish thing that we will eventually grow out of, and then there's no religion, there's no need. The religion is such a fossil of our primitive brains. And the other one is that religion is inherent to the conscious or sentient or what we would call in philosophy the human condition. And so it will always be there. There will be changes, various religions, different cultures will have, and then there will be the debates of how good or bad or true religion is. But basically, I think science fiction or futuristic fantasy creation could be categorized as either religion is something that we will get over. It's a primitive thing
atavism
that we will grow out.
Yeah.
Yes, we will grow out of. Or religion is just so inherent to being conscious, to being sentient, then that it will always be there.
And I think I fall in the latter category, despite me being the Count Dooku of Greek Orthodoxy, having left with my red lightsaber. I don't tend to view religion as bad. I tend to view it as endemic, and it's a question of, for me, the deeper question is really not whether you're religious or not; it's whether you're a pluralist or not. Because I don't think the opposite of a zealot is an atheist. I think the opposite of a zealot is a pluralist. So I like that approach, Yonatan, and it made me think. I started kind of going through the rota of religions that I was aware of in sci-fi. I do think that that it's not an exhaustive thesis. I think that there are examples of sci-fi and religious portrayal that would fall out with that particular dynamic. But I do think it's a very interesting.
Could be, of course, could be.
Sure, but I think it's a very interesting way of looking at it. And I thought about it, and I do think like most of the sci-fi that takes a negative view of religion, I do find to be more of the superstition atavism thing than like an overt force for evil. Like Star Trek, I think, tends to generally view it as a superstition. It's not. I don't think Star Trek is militant about it, but there are little tips of the hat, like in The Cage, which is the sort of proto-pilot of the original Star Trek series that's brought back later on. There's a moment where Captain Pike is captured by the Telosians, and they're playing these mind games in him, and they say, "We will now show you images of one of your forgotten Earth mythologies," and they send him to hell. And the implication is strongly like, you being a man of science in the 24th century, you would not know of what hell is, but your superstitious ancestors would have.
So regarding this, I think you can take my thesis to the two extremes. Is Star Trek is besides being very negative about religion in a very obvious way, in Star Trek original series, you can see in the way they talk about it that Starfleet Command does not have any regard to religion. They have outgrown it. They did not grow up near religious people, knowing religion. It's sort of like learning, about prehistory. There used to be hunter-gatherers people, but we don't really know anything. So the whole approach of Star Trek is religion is sort of something that belongs in the past. In the 24th century, no one actually knows about religion unless it's a primitive society that the Enterprise encounters.
Right.
The other extreme for me is Babylon 5, which is an amazing series. I really like it. And for me, it's a superb example of treating religion. Not only that every planet has a religion. Every species has a religion. They coexist. So there's a lot of discussions about pluralism in religion and how do we face different, there's moral dilemmas. The doctor who operates on someone whose religion forbids surgical operations. What does he do? Does he save his life? Does he doesn't? Does he respect his religion? And all sorts of these things, and the whole series is premised. The premise of I won't spoil it to anyone, but the whole series treats religion as sort of something that, if you are conscious, if you are sentient, if you have the ability to ask, "Why am I here?" then you would eventually come at an answer. That answer would be religious, and it will always be there. People will always ask, "Why am I here?" and they will always give answers.
Yeah, I concur with that. I take that endemic thing, and I'll say I'm approaching this now being an apostate, now being an agnostic. I don't take a cosmological view of religion. I don't view it as a function of the spiritual world pervading the material world. Rather, I see it as a ground up material process. But there seems to be an anthropological commonality in all human beings, both that I know and that I've read about, of a tendency to want to create sacred stories and myths to bring order to an otherwise chaotic world and purpose to our lives.
Yes.
And that can be an overt organized religion like Catholicism or Mormonism or Judaism, but I think it can also take the form of political religions like Maoism. Or
Right.
Sovietology, and then I think you also have little kind of overlapping sub-mythologies that happen all the time. Like if somebody were looking at a couple thousand years, were to look at most of the films coming out of Hollywood in the United States, I think that they would look and go, oh, the mythology that the Americans believed was that your purpose in life is to find your significant other. And that once you find your significant other, you have achieved the reason for being, and you are then happy. And all happiness is derived from romantic fulfillment. And that's not really an organized religious precept, but it is baked into our mythology and our culture. And I'll say when I say mythology, I do not mean I don't mean that it's fictitious. I merely mean like a story with emotional resonance to it. And I do think those are absolutely endemic. And I'll start, Jennings. We've talked. I want you to weigh in here.
Well, I want to start. I'm so sad that you guys started with Star Trek because that's what I was going to start with. What are the odds? No, I wanted to. I don't know if this is exactly pushing back, but the example that I drew out of Star Trek was actually one that runs a little bit counter to the normal narrative that you guys were describing. You're absolutely right. In most cases in Star Trek, religion does very much seem to be that quaint sort of thing that we all outgrew a long time ago, and the civilizations who still practice religion tend to be the ones,
You're
that the
worshiping
Federation
a robot dragon. You need to get rid of it and go to the stars. You're God's lies. Destroy your idols.
And don't forget, what does God need with a starship?
Right.
So, but no, the example I was going to pull was actually the Bajorans. If you watch Star Trek: The Next Generation, when the Bajorans are introduced, what little you learn about their beliefs in the Next Generation is it does kind of follow that. It's somewhat quaint, and but then as you progress into Deep Space Nine, and Heaton, you're more qualified even to talk on this than I am.
And literally, I'm more qualified to talk about Deep Space Nine than any of the other things I do, including the political podcast that I have. I have literally more knowledge stored up about Deep Space Nine than I do about American politics. But yes, please continue.
Well, so correct me then if I'm misapprehending, what the overall narrative was. But as I understand it, what we come to learn about the Bajorans is they are a deeply religious and spiritual people who are tied to these entities, that they refer to as the prophets, that everyone else refers to as the wormhole aliens.
Right.
And it seems to me that there comes this point, this very interesting and I think maybe even rare in science fiction point of fusion of like a refusion of science to philosophy, in the sense that the Bajorans know that the entities living in the wormhole are aliens, but they also worship them as gods.
Right.
And I think that's I don't know. Give me your thoughts on that, and Yonatan, yours as well.
You make an excellent point with that, Jennings. I think Deep Space Nine deals with religion far more than the other series do. I mean, it is an ongoing motif that spans multiple episodes in that series. And I think that it is generally, I'm going to say, respectful to the idea of religion. I don't think that it certainly doesn't, it never crosses the threshold to like, oh, wow, we were wrong. Spirituality really is the deeper truths, which like Battlestar Galactica does, for example, where constantly there are supernatural entities that are intervening that are beyond the scope of knowledge. I think I do.
Well,
think
in the world of Star Trek, because you have such a multifarious pantheon of alien types with various different powers that we don't necessarily understand. Again, I think the line between natural and supernatural is completely blurred.
Yeah, well, I think that
particularly with the.
Yeah, excuse me, Josh. Yeah, I think that's the trick with Deep Space Nine, though, is that like with Deep Space Nine, it's not that the primitive Bajoran people are worshiping sky gods, or they have a book about gangsters that some space guy left, and so now they're all gangsters, right? Like it's not like a superstitious barbarism. It is rather they have taken a religious approach to a demonstrable, mysterious phenomenon. And so I think the Federation, while never fully endorsing the idea they're gods at all, is at least like we acknowledge that they exist. We acknowledge that they're not a fiction. It's just that the Bajorans have a different interpretation of this event. So I think it's a little bit different. But I do think Jennings that there are plenty of examples where religion doesn't quite fit that dichotomy of a superstition or an endemic thing, and we can get to those in a minute. But I do want to talk about a couple of the ones that I think do tend to be more in the superstition camp. I would say Isaac Asimov was very much in the religion is a superstition to be overcome and discarded. If you go back and read the Foundation series,
I'm not sure, by the way.
You're not what?
I would say that Isaac Asimov was on the camp of religion is a made-up superstition, but maybe we don't need to throw it away. Maybe we need to use it, because that's the Foundation series. Let's utilize that superstition.
That's true, but also it's not the Foundation that's utilizing the religion for the benefit of the Foundation. It's the Foundation that's utilizing it for the benefit of colonial footstools. So it would be like the equivalent. It would be like if the United Kingdom or the British Empire, if all the English were like, wait a minute, God's a lie, it doesn't exist. Well, what a helpful lie. We shall go into India and tell people God sent us. So they're like none of the people that are in the know are religious in the Asimov series. So which I think belies a kind of religion is manipulation idea of the universe. And I think, like to a lesser extent, but very similar, I think Vonnegut kind of has a similar position. So in Cat's Cradle, there's Bokononism, which is this sort of fun, fanciful religion that Vonnegut made up. And there's also in the Sirens of Titan, there's the Church of God, the Utterly Indifferent. And I think merely based on the fact that I want to say Asimov was the head of I think it was the American Humanist Association. And then when he died, I think Vonnegut became the head of the American Humanist Association.
Possibly, yeah.
And so both of them, I know at least outside of their fiction, were very critical of the idea of religion and tended to view it as a superstition. And then there's other examples too where I think it's also like that is the more superstition thing. I think you can actually go a bit further, Yonatan, where people aren't just, this is a silly thing that we've overcome, but this is an active bad thing, right? So like The Handmaid's Tale is an allegory about theocracy. It's not just that the people believe this irritating thing that we know is wrong. It's that this is an active force of oppression in the world. Or I've not read The Golden Compass, but it's my understanding that The Golden Compass is like kind of like an atheist allegory, where like the Pope is a bad guy, and I don't know all the details to it, but it's sort of like a counter-religion allegory for kids.
Yes, The Golden Compass is to atheism what Narnia is to Christianity.
Great.
It's an allegory of how we are actually right about everything.
Good. It sounds super fun. Yeah. And I'll say that there are fun things as well that I think poke fun at religion without really being openly contemptible of it. So like Futurama is a great example. I love Futurama. And
oh, yeah.
Futurama, like whenever they talk about religion, they've got like robot hell, the robot devil, robotology, robot Judaism. One of my favorite lines in all of Futurama is when it's the episode where Bender, I think he converts to robotology, and like once you've converted to robotology, if you leave it, then you are given to the robot devil. And at one point, he's talking to this robot preacher, and he brings up some book, and the robot preacher goes, "That book is a book of lies. The only book of lies worth believing is the Bible." Like, it's very...
Yes. So I want to say that when I presented my thesis, I want to emphasize, I think it is every story, every creation, those two extremes that I presented, maybe really it's not a dichotomy, maybe it's more of a spectrum, because we're postmodernists and we like spectrums. But I think this is in both extremes, you can treat religion as bad or good, evil or beneficial or harmful. So there are people who think it's a harmful superstition or a beneficial superstition. There are people who think it's a harmful part of human condition or a beneficial part of human condition, or a mix of all of these approaches. And I think that, but generally you can usually sense the writer or the creator had sort of like not always an agenda, but an approach, the way he sees religion. And I must confess that I've never progressed over Star Trek original series. I did hear that Deep Space Nine has a more complex view of religion, although it does present religion as something that humans has readapted because the stability across the sector is, somehow, we're less stable. There's more war. There's more problems, more conflict. So we reverted to, we regressed to religion to solve our many problems. We are no longer living in a socialist utopia. So we need opium for the masses, if to quote Marx.
I'm curious, where would you guys put, say, like Frank Herbert or Robert Heinlein? Because there's lots of religion in the works of Frank Herbert and Dune. There's, it's a book like, first of all, it openly talks about vestiges of Christianity. Frank Herbert in Dune refers to the Orange Catholic Bible, which is presumably a fusion of Protestantism.
It's the notes in the end of one of the versions specifically says that it's sort of they took some Catholic and Protestants and anti-thinking machines and put it all together. My favorite Frank Herbert religion should be Buddhism. Where Buddhism and Islam just merged, and then there's Zen Sunni and Zen Shia. And obviously they don't like each other.
Yeah, which Frank Herbert loved doing that. Frank Herbert loved taking. He loved cobbling together melanges of various cultures. So like when you look at it culturally, the desert people on Arrakis are this sort of synthesis of like Turkish and like desert Arab, but there's also bits and pieces of like Kazakhstan and like he really did like a lot of homework on it. And
they're basically Bedouins and Turkic nomads.
That's what I was going for. Bedouin. Thank you. Yes, Bedouin's a much better way of putting that. And he has there's lots of overt religion in the book as it unfolds of messianism. Paul is Muad'Dib. He is the Messiah to the people of Arrakis.
Right.
And so he's relying on these motifs of charismatic leaders that break the cycle and lead a tribe to triumph. Yonatan, would you see him as being? I get like is he for the record, I've not read all of the books. I've only read the first 3. So would you see him as being on the religion is endemic and we should utilize it side of things, or would you view him as? So
I would say that he's on the camp of religion is a useful endemic phenomena, and I would say that he is explicitly so because I don't remember in which book. I think it's the 3rd book. Jessica, mother of Paul, says, no, it's actually in the first book. Jessica, mother of Paul, they run away from the capital city. They arrive at this nomads and the Fremens, and she talks about something called the Messiana.
The Mesde Quadrach?
No, that's something else. That Quizat Hadrach is Hebrew for. It's a mispronunciation of Hebrew.
I was about to say, you pronounce that very differently than I do. You pronounce that with a lot more confidence than I ever did.
Quizat Hadrach, because it comes from Hebrew. It's stolen from the Gemara. Quizat Hadrach.
How dare you, Frank Herbert?
It's part of Jewish mythology. But anyway, she tells him about this something that they did at the sisterhood. The Bene Gesserit, which is also a Hebrew mispronunciation, and they sent agents all across the universe, all across the galaxy, to become reverend mothers of various tribes. So in case one of their members had to flee to some backward society, they would accept her as the reverend mother.
Right, yeah.
And if you would notice, when they arrive at the Fremen, they have a reverend mother who knows Jessica. They speak the secret language. She takes the rites, R-I-T-E-S, to become reverend mother. And she talks to Paul about the fact that they cynically spread religion across the world to prepare for the coming of their order to take over that society.
Yeah, it would be like if the Freemasons were to like spread out to different planets and be like, hey, all this stuff is totally true. By the way, if anybody ever says Tubal-Cain, they're sent from God. Don't kill them. If they say Tubal-Cain, they're good. And I forgot about that. You're right. There is an actual cynical attempt to infiltrate the mythology of individual planets and plant the seeds of Bene Gesserit superiority.
Exactly. But notice that in it, there's a hidden assumption that all primitive societies would have a religion. It's assumed that if you are a sentient being, if you are a human group or a sentient group, you would have a religion. They don't even take into account the possibility of arriving at a primitive society of any society in any place that doesn't have a religion. Okay. And also on the more advanced societies, the emperor is obviously shrouded in ritualistic and religious mythology, and even the spice has a sort of mythic, standing. And of course, I mean, they are looking for the Quizat Hadrach. They are looking for their Messiah, who is supposed to be a male, but he arrived one generation too early, and it brings havoc to their plan to cynically use the Messiah to take over the known galaxy.
Well, I think that this is a fascinating theory so far. We've got you're establishing a spectrum, Yonatan, of sort of superstition to endemic. I'm going to think of it for my own purposes more like a foursquare, where there's benign superstition, there's malicious superstition, there's benign or useful endemic quality, and dangerous endemic quality. I will say now having established that, I do see a lot of science fiction that falls out with that particular model. Useful and interesting though I find it. For example, I can think of several authors that I don't think that are not approaching it from this is an endemic anthropological quality, but rather this is just an actual supernatural thing that is good. So, like for example, you mentioned Narnia earlier, and I think Narnia and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and that whole series is by far what C.S. Lewis is best known for. But he did write science fiction as well.
And it's not a science fiction.
No, but he did write science fiction.
Narnia is fantasy.
Yes,
right. But his science fiction. Yes, maybe treats. Well, he was an evangelist, so not an evangelist, a proselytizer of Christianity. So he obviously woven it into all his works. but I think I haven't read much C.S. Lewis, so I can't attest.
I'll say he did. You're right, and I'll say for the purposes of the program, I say sci-fi. Really, we tend to talk about speculative fiction, which would include fantasy. So I think it's germane for our discussion.
So my thesis only holds for sci-fi.
Gotcha. That said, though, C.S. Lewis did write a science fiction trilogy called the Space Trilogy, in which the protagonist, a man named Ransom, who's very clearly a stand-in for C.S. Lewis, is getting on rockets and flying to other planets. He goes to Mars, where he discovers that all of the planets in the solar system, at least the ones that are encountered in the series, are inhabited. And on Mars, there's like a bipedal beaver species. There's like a super skinny, super tall mountain species, and I think there's a third one that I can't remember. And they all sort of have a macroorganism, the sort of non-corporeal entity, which has been assigned governorship of Mars that they don't quite worship, but they do revere, and it is very, very clearly an angel. Yes. And it's C.S. Lewis sort of infusing rockets with Christian cosmology. That there are individual angels that are given dominion over each planet, and our particular angel rebelled and went bad, and so our planet has been quarantined from the rest of the galaxy to stave off infection. And then meanwhile, in the sequel to it, in Paralandra, I think he gets abducted by a scientist, and he goes to Venus, where which is like Mars is like a very old planet, and you get the impression it's kind of winding down, and the species are sort of folding up and preparing to go through extinction. Whereas Venus is this very new planet, and he meets the very first woman who's much like an Eve figure, and the plot of the book is basically him playing the role of the good angel on her shoulder, while the scientist that came with him is playing the role of the serpent in the garden, and he's trying to stop the first men and women of Venus from plunging into the fall that has befallen mankind.
From performing the original sin.
Yeah.
Yes, from performing the original sin.
Exactly, yeah. So I'll say, so C.S. Lewis, I think was not taking it from I guess we're stuck with religion. He's very much taking it.
No, C.S. Lewis was very much religion is true, Christianity is true. My version of Christianity is true, not mine, but his version. And yes.
Jennings. Do you have anything to say? Given that you're still holding strong, do you have anything you want to weigh in on C.S. Lewis about?
Well, I do think that Lewis represents a pretty narrow band of science fiction writers, because he did write the Space Trilogy that you're referring to. Also, he wrote I would almost classify The Great Divorce as a science fiction book.
Because that's the one where the author goes to heaven, and it's sort of a non-dualistic or he doesn't go to heaven. He kind of goes to like a purgative world, or like a limbo or something.
Yes. And where the grass is hard, but your feet can get adjusted to it. I would say he represents a fairly narrow band of science fiction writers within the past couple of centuries who are very not merely accepting of religion, but in fact pro-religion.
Right,
I mean, they're very much pushing it into the narrative. And he was a great writer. I enjoy his stuff. I think it's interesting also. I just reread a month or two ago Journey to the Center of the Earth, Jules Verne, and this is just a little bit of an aside here, but something that I've noticed, because before that I reread H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. I reread that after I read it like 20 years ago. And something that's interesting about 19th century science fiction versus 20th and now 21st century science fiction is the attitude towards religion. Verne you can almost feel him wedging in the occasional, this, what a magnificent cavernous opening we came upon that is an exemplar of the creator's genius or something like that. Something very Victorian sounding that they say, but it's you don't get the same sense out of that you would get out of somebody like Lewis, who clearly is like that is his goal. I don't feel the same way about Verne, but I wanted to throw that in there because we're mostly talking about 20th century science fiction. But
actually,
Jennings,
King off of that, Jennings, I suspect you're right, and I suspect I could be wrong about this, but I would suspect that you'd probably also find the greatest hostility to religion in science fiction in that same period. In that, and the parallel I'll draw is. I doubt anybody on the phone call when they hear the word king is like, fucking kings, goddamn monarchs. No, we have to, because we're used to kings being these, cute European, like ornamental figureheads. And I think in the same way that, like, for me, not being religious anymore, like, I didn't grow up in a theocracy. Like, I didn't rebel against a religion that I thought was like, holding everybody down and like selling indulgences. Like, for me, religion's this thing I don't believe in anymore, but I still go to coffee hour because I like the people. So if I'm writing science fiction, even if I'm not, endorsing the spiritual concepts, at the same time, I don't really have any great animosity towards it. But I suspect that if you're coming out of a Victorian era where there was just a rigorously enforced religious outlook and the church had actual sway over society and an oppressive capacity to staunch science, I suspect that the science fiction writers of that era were much more combative in their interpretation.
I think that certainly in the areas where science and religion clash, it's certainly the case that if we look at the history of science, and I'll make this very brief, obviously science begins in our history tied directly with philosophy and therefore religious outlook. So, the earliest scientists were also early proponents of religion. I think that we've seen a gradual divorce of that over time. And now what you see, what you're describing is, for example, Jules Verne talks about things like evolution, and he does so it probably would not have been considered with kid gloves at the time. So in that regard, I suspect you're correct that the areas where religion and science were clashing, particularly then, are probably areas where the science fiction people were the ones taking up the charge. But again, he and others like him are still, it seems to me, and maybe I'm putting words in their mouth, or putting intent behind their words, but it seems to me that it's an obligatory thing. It's like, oh yeah, I better, I've gone 15 pages. I better make sure and acknowledge that our creator,
just so everybody knows about Victorian
this illustrious world.
Yeah, but then you do get a little bit more pushback. I mean, like a generation later with like Aldous Huxley and George Orwell, even though they had different dystopias and different visions of dystopias, I think they were both fairly condemnatory of the concept of religion. They viewed it as that manipulative force or that opiate of the masses.
So I'd say first that I probably need to revise my thesis to 20th century sci-fi authors.
Oh, okay.
But and it's great because that's what we do with the science, with all forms of thinking practices. We constantly revise. But I would say that one of the things that I find most interesting in regard to the relationship between science fiction and religion is the relationship between science and religion. And I don't remember who said it, but there was a philosopher that said the distinction between the two is very modern because religion is the first science. It's the first attempt to explain nature and the human phenomena around us. And then we moved on to what's called the natural sciences or natural philosophy, and then we split. Theology split from the natural sciences. But at the beginning, there was no distinction. So you saw diversity of animals. You said, okay, God created all those animals. And then we developed the ideas of evolution and etc. So we said, okay, let's delegate this to the natural sciences. We thinned out religion from various places. And in the end, I think that science fiction follows, authors, they write within their own cultural context. So for 19th century science fiction writers, religion was a fact of life. You had religion, and God was a fact of life. And they were on the beginning, on the starting journey of getting out of turning religion from dominant to being sort of a cultural phenomena rather than a political phenomena. And so the writing is very much, in that schism, in that whether religion is true or not, because that was the question of the hour. And also rationalism became prominent. So the question whether religion was true or not was also the question whether if religion is wrong, then we need to abandon it. Because we are rationalists, we are humanists, we abandon things which are wrong. And then 20th century came with, the rise of postmodernism and narrativism and the death of the author. And suddenly, because religion lost its thorns, right? You could focus on the roses. You could see suddenly the good side and the non-threatening side of religion. And also the clash was no longer whether religion is true or not, but what place does it hold within our society? Even if it's wrong, even if it's true. Does religion is a personal experience, a communal experience, a human experience? So the question of narrative, of whether the stories we tell ourselves, all of it became much more prominent in 20th century science fiction. You had, obviously 19th century science fiction had it within it, or speculative fiction, which is much broader. And I think that's what makes, for me, religion in speculative fiction in the 20th century much more interesting, because it speaks about an experience that is much more personal to me.
It's a fascinating premise. Yeah. So in the 19th century, science fiction is concerned with cosmology. It's concerned with what is true, what is false, what must we abandon for the light of the real. Whereas the 20th century is not about truth and false so much as about where is the appropriate place for religion. What is the appropriate application of religion? And Jennings, it sounded like you were about to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love the analogy of the thorns being removed so that the rose can be appreciated. I think that's such a fascinating way to look at it. I'd like that.
Yeah, there's, and actually to go back to what you were saying a moment ago, Jennings, about or I guess both of you had a similar impulse to this of religion being the first science. There's a book called A Canticle for Leibowitz, which is one of the great works of 20th century Cold War hysteria, where like civilization has been obliterated by atoms and atomic weaponry and whatnot. And the premise is that in this post-war, mankind has been knocked back to the Stone Ages. The only institution, the only remnant institution capable of maintaining archives and thus preserving knowledge in any meaningful capacity are Roman Catholic monasteries. And so it's this sort of basically the parallel of the role monasteries played in the Dark Ages, where literacy suddenly plummeted and the only people that read were monks. And it's grafting that onto a post-nuclear environment. And in that capacity, I think is really interesting in that it's not just like C.S. Lewis's pro-spirituality, right? A Canticle for Leibowitz is actually a very just pro-religious institution, and you rarely see that. Like you rarely see science fiction authors that are like, you know what we need? More bishops. That's the thing we don't have enough of, and he's very interesting in that capacity. So a couple of things that I'll throw in before I leave the science fiction authors that I think are just gung ho on religion. I do want to throw in Madeleine L'Engle, author of A Wrinkle in Time, which came back into prominence here 2-3 years ago. Oprah Winfrey, among others. Mindy Kaling and Zach Galifianakis all starred in a film based off of that book. But those books are. They are very much speculative fiction. I'm not sure whether we'd call them science fiction or fantasy, because they do have an element of time travel, but they also have elements of magic. But they're very much comported around a Christian worldview, both cosmologically and sort of plot wise. Like they go back and meet Noah. They like the kids are friends with cherubim, things like that. Like it's very like it doesn't have quite the same like this is so you can become Christian that C.S. Lewis had. I mean, C.S. Lewis is very upfront about his evangelical pretensions with his work. And I don't think Catherine Lingle was. I think she just was deeply influenced and enjoyed putting it in there. It
was Madeline.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Madeline Engel.
I'm saving you tweets, Heaton. I'm saving you tweets.
So two authors that I want to play with that I think are very relevant to this, that are very big names within the 20th century science fiction, are Ray Bradbury and Arthur C. Clarke. And when I look at their treatment of religion, I don't really see either of them as condemning religion. Rather, they tend to use it, in my interpretation, they use religion as a way to poke fun at human certitude and intellectual folly. So I don't get the impression that they might have been atheists, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to me that the ire that they have in the story is ever really directed at superstition or atavism, but rather of people that just assume that they're correct in their thinking. And I'll give a couple of examples of that. In The Illustrated Man, which is a short story collection by Ray Bradbury, there's a short story called The Man. And in The Man, a protagonist visits this distant planet where the people are ecstatically happy. They are just overwhelmingly happy. And the guy's like, why are you guys so happy? And he's very skeptical of it. And they're like, oh, this holy man came to our planet. And he explained to us that, like, if we all just loved each other and quit killing each other with sticks, we'd have a great time and there'd be plenty of food and stuff. And now we all love each other. It's a great old time. And over the course of the short story, you sort of realize that that apparently Jesus is some sort of spiritual space being who's been skipping around from planet to planet, just looking for a planet that doesn't murder him. And he finally found this one. And the protagonist thinks that it's so hooey. He thinks it's he thinks it's flim-flam. And he decides that he's going to spend the rest of his life chasing this spirit charlatan across the galaxy until he can kill him. and meanwhile, it turns out Space Jesus is living in secret on the planet, and everybody's having a good time. And I take from that not so much that the Christians are right or wrong. I take from that more of like this sort of idea that there are some people who are always going to find a way to be miserable, and there are some people that have a difficult time just accepting. Just accepting a good situation of, like, you know, even if he is a flim-flam man, the planet's working pretty well. So, you know, why rock the boat? And then the other two that they'll bring up.
And I take from that is a perfect Futurama episode.
Yeah, that is a very good future. If there'd been Robot Jesus and like the crew decided Robot Jesus must be caught and disassembled, yeah, that would be a pretty good Futurama. The two Arthur C. Clarke stories that stand out to me are The Star and the 9 Billion Names of God. So The Star, the premise to that is that there is an astrophysical mission, some sort of scientific survey mission in an alien system. And the astrophysicist on this particular mission is a Jesuit priest, which is not unthinkable. The Jesuits have they have observatories and things. The Jesuits tend to have, rigorous training. And the Jesuit priest is sort of grappling with his own doubts when he's going into the situation, and they find on the edge of this solar system that has been obliterated from supernova an archive that has been left there from a dead civilization that foresaw the end of their civilization. And it's sort of like if we left a really big archive on Pluto, like it's far enough out that it wasn't destroyed. They saw it coming. It's a bit like a bit like that episode of TNG where, the civilization's dying, but they leave a record of themselves behind so that, that they don't fully die.
The inner light.
The scientists and the humans are going through these archives, and they're marveling at the grace with which the civilization comported itself as its doom came upon them, and the intelligence and urbaneness and everything. And the story concludes with the Jesuit astrophysicist who has become, very smitten with this dead species, realizing that when he calculates the time of the supernova, it would correlate perfectly with the star over Bethlehem at the birth of Jesus. And so so the beginning of his religion, or the heralding of God on earth, was also the death and destruction of another entire species. And I look at that, and I'm like, I don't know whether he was making a point that God is capricious, or that I'm not sure. I don't know how to graph that onto your thesis, Yonatan. I enjoy it, but I don't quite know.
So I'm gonna remark about the star something. I'm gonna say something controversial, but I'm not the host, so I can. But I will preface it. Yes, but I will preface it by saying it is very controversial.
Thank you for that, because I was afraid you and Jennings might team up and wrench control of the podcast. But it sounds like I'm still nominally in control.
One of the
it could still happen.
I'm gonna take a step aside, tell a little story, and go back to make my point. One of the best ever theological discussions I've ever attended was a seminar hosted by two priests and a rabbi. It sounds like a joke, but it was an actual seminar. And they were discussing the problem of evil. And the two Christians, one was Catholic and the other, I think, Anglican. They went on and on and on about how to, make sense of a weird and problematic world with a providential, benevolent, all-powerful, omnipotent God. And then after this went out for about 20 minutes, they passed on the microphone to the rabbi, and the rabbi just went, well, in our book, God isn't benevolent, and just put the mic down. And it was like, that's it. That's what I have to contribute to this discussion. In our book, he's capricious. He's not benevolent. I mean, he is benevolent, but not omnibenevolent. He doesn't only have a good part. And that solves the problem of evil. Evil is part of God. End of discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Old Testament God coming for a comeback. Don't piss him off. He's got lightning bolts.
And yes, don't piss him up. He will drop my cue. So going back to Arthur C. Clarke, I think Arthur C. Clarke is sort of like he himself was a staunch atheist, a known atheist. He was very even borderline anti-religious. But with the Star of Bethlehem, what he says is, look at the destruction this supernova did. It was horrendous. It destroyed the civilization that knew that its end was coming, but it created ours. It's a sort of ambivalent. Religion is a natural phenomena, because I think he implies that in that book, I think he implies that religion is
he's definitely, he would definitely be taking aim at the premise that the universe is organized by a massively
a benevolent, omnipotent
God who just
white dude.
Every single bad thing has a very good purpose in mind, and you will not die in a car wreck, for angels will stop that. He's taking. There's no safety belt. There's no bumpers in the bowling lane.
But he's also I think that he's on the religion is endemic camp. He's not on either religion is good or bad camp. I think he's kind of neutral about it. But he's one of the prime examples for me of an author who is personally atheist, but he's culturally steeped in, all sorts of religious, especially Christianity. And he brings it in. And I don't think he's anti-religious in his writing.
Well, and actually on that note, and the other story I was going to bring up, the 9 billion names of God, he, I think, is really more poking fun at, again, certitude. Because the premise to the 9 billion names of God is that there is a Tibetan monastery high on the mountains, and the monks there have determined that, and I guess they're Buddhist, although I'm not really sure how this would square up with Tibetan Buddhism, but let's just assume. Anyway, they're Tibetan Buddhists, and they have determined that the point of existence is for mankind to learn and say all of the names of God, and they reckon it's about 9 billion. And the point at which all of the names of God are known and said, then the point of the universe will have been achieved, and the universe will end. And that is their goal. Their goal is to wrap up the universe, to provide meaning by ending it. And so they're working on it, but they do the math, and they're like, wow, 9 billion. This is going to take a very long time for us to figure this out. And they sort of reckon that, the names are probably less than 15 characters. But even then, it's quite a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so they hire these Western computer programmers to come in, and they're like, can you come in and use your computer skills to just knock out all the babble, all the things that are very clearly incoherent, and just have the computer rattle off these names of God, and then we'll have the monks write them down. And the computer scientists are like, oh, okay, we'll do this. Backwards, superstitious hill people. Your money's good to us. That's fine. And but as they're installing the system, they're like, oh, wait a minute. Once we install this system, these stupid monks will realize that that basically we'll install the system. It'll do its job. The world won't end, and they'll think that our computer didn't work because the world didn't end because they're backwards hillbillies. And so what we'll do is we're gonna time the computer system to work slow enough that it'll finally finish up about the time we're at the bottom of the mountain. And the story ends with them getting to the bottom of the mountain going like, hey, you want to get a burger? And they look up and the stars are starting to wink out one by one. And I take from that this kind of, not because I don't really think it's pro-Buddhist or anti-science. I think it's more like it's just intellectual hubris is something that we should always jeer at.
Yes.
I was just going to say, I wanted to go back for a second to the hubris of God question, or sorry, not the hubris, the caprice of God. A couple of thoughts. One is that's a minor point here, but it's entirely subjective. I don't think that if God is doing it, can it be bad, or is it just that we perceive it as bad? And that's a philosophical question, and maybe aside. The other thing that it reminded me of was actually a line from a Stephen King story. I don't remember which one, but he's talking about Job, which I know you and I were talking about Job before the podcast started. And Stephen King's summation of Job is that Job says to God, I've got all this pain and sorrow in my life and I don't understand it and I need an answer, and God doesn't care. Like that's how he puts it. I just wanted to throw that in there. I think that the caprice of God is maybe the number one reason why people who are religious cease to be religious. I don't know if that's something you could speak to, but certainly the closest I've ever come to losing faith has been looking around and saying, okay, a lot of this seems really random. Not even so much why would a loving God allow this, although that is a question that a lot of people, myself included, ask. But just, everything's so random. It seems so random, with some measure of underlying order, but a lot of times not. So I don't know. Anyway, I had that thought when you were talking about God being capricious, and I wanted to throw that in there.
And actually, guys, I am going to wind down the podcast because I know that a couple of you, have to leave. So I will preface a couple of things for people listening. I know we didn't talk about the thing you wanted us to talk about, whatever that thing is, because everybody listening right now is going, they didn't bring up Dan Simmons and how, he says Catholicism whenever he talks about Hyperion, or you didn't bring up the fact that Philip K. Dick was a devout Catholic that was also on LSD, or there's all these different things. I'm well aware of that. Unfortunately, the sheer scope of it precludes us from covering all of it. But I do think that we were able to at least explore some really interesting ideas and themes of religion in science fiction. And Yonatan, I very much enjoyed having you on. Thank you for availing yourself.
Thank you.
Jennings?
One last thing. I'm going to shamelessly plug you. Everyone who thinks we didn't talk about the thing he wanted us to talk about, go to Patreon, support Andrew, and then come to the Discord server and tell us about it. Shout at me. I'm at the Discord server. Shout at me. You didn't talk about my favorite theological sci-fi crossover. and then I'll talk to you about it.
Yeah, and I'll say that is, you can go to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. I host 2 podcasts, and I know Yonatan through the political one, and I suspect that Yonatan is being very, very upfront and accurate with you. If you're listening and you want to talk to Yonatan, I think you can find him on Discord.
Yes.
And he will very willingly engage in a very spirited and excellent conversation with you about all things religious and science fiction. And Jennings, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Don't talk to me at all.
Jennings is going to shut the door in his cabin and not speak to anybody, including me, for a month.
Just kidding. Anybody who wants to get a hold of me can find me on Twitter or on Facebook and hit me up, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you. I will most likely say, "Oh, I haven't read that one." That's what I end up saying to Heaton all the time. And
I'll just end on a science-y note. I think it's really cool that one of us is in a house in Oklahoma, one of us is in a barn, and one of us is in Tel Aviv, and we've been able to have this conversation, which is amazing. And it was very fun to have it with you guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Every week, my good friend Andrew Heaton and I typically go vagabonding around the galaxy. However, lately we've been having just about as much lockdown fun as everyone else. We have had to rely on video games, some spare wormholes, and intergalactic portals that we found around the house, and we've been using those to give you the same kind of entertainment that you've come to expect. Now, Andrew isn't here right now. It's about 8 o'clock, which means that he's just finishing up his last riverboat cruise for the day. He's been doing that in his spare time. He's a great riverboat cruise captain, and he often tells me about it. I get seasick, so it's not my thing. I haven't gone yet. At least I've been telling him I get seasick. I don't really... He probably won't hear this, and I don't want to... Okay, it's just a lot. You know, we're around each other a lot. And I'm having a little bit of, like, Heaton fatigue. I don't really know what to call it, but, you know, I'm sure you guys get it. If you're listening, you're probably like, he's not on this part? Great. You know, and I get it. Believe me. Any hoozles. So what we're talking about today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So the other day, we found a really large interdimensional portal in the back of our refrigerator. We checked around the apartment, found one on the ottoman, but other than that, one in the microwave, but that was too small. We sealed them all up. You don't want to go to bed with an open portal, that's for sure. Remember that, kids. So we ended up getting this all fixed up. We had a guy come in, he did the whole thing. Now, long story short, there was kind of a rough and tumble fight last night between a couple people. I won't say who. One of them is name rhymes with Fandrew Heaton. And he got into a little bit of a row with Warfaro, and one of them got pushed into the back of the refrigerator, and it opened back up. It's nobody's fault, except it was Andrew's fault. But the point is, we're going to seal it on up. So I'm actually just going to bring you, I already moved everything out, I'm just going to bring you into the fridge with me. This is kind of fun, right? So I have taken it upon myself to go get some 2x4s, and I'm going to nail these in here. And now what you want to do is you want to be careful when you're nailing these, because if you I'm not really sure what that hissing is, but that seems okay, well, it's coming from that pipe, and that's like smells like it could be radioactive. Oh boy, okay, all right, oh no, oh god, oh, this escalated so fast. Oh shit, fucking shit. Oh, I can seal it. I gotta seal it. Okay. Oh my god. Oh, hold on. If I can just reach up underneath. Here, I'll use my... Okay. Alright, well, I got the hole sealed, but... This whole refrigerator... Well, it's radioactive now. There's nothing... If I open this door to the fridge, it's gonna flood the... It's gonna flood the whole apartment. This kind of radiation is gonna kill... It could kill everybody in it. So I'm just gonna have to keep the the door shut and not... Oh, hey. Oh, Andrew's here. Hey, buddy.
Well, I'm back from the riverboat cruise. 2 kids fell in this time. Ay caramba. Nick, why are you inside of the transparent refrigerator? I don't think we've ever mentioned that it's a transparent refrigerator before, but that's what it is, a transparent refrigerator.
Hey, don't open the door. Don't open the door. No, there's radiation. I broke a pipe in here when I was trying to spackle.
Well, you weren't trying to spackle with a hammer again, were you? Because we've been over this. Nick, hey, buddy. You're gonna be just fine, pal. Don't panic. Just because you flooded our refrigerator with radioactive gas, just sit tight. I'm gonna go to the medicine cabinet and get you some St. John's wort.
I'm gonna miss you. And Megan and Tarful and Warfaro and Trebecca and EJ and AJ-19 and the iguana. I don't think I'm missing anyone. It's not important.
Yeah, that's about everybody.
Heaton. I am and always will be your friend.
Thank you guys for coming to the funeral. I really appreciate it. I'm sure Nick would if he were here.
Yeah, we can't go outside.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because of the lockdown. I forgot about that. Well, all the same, Joe Blow, thank you. Thank you for being here. And AJ-19, I just want you to know that you're a great protocol droid and an even better dishwasher. And I know how much Nick relied on you.
I just always told him, be careful of the reverse Indiana Jones.
You said that a lot, AJ.
Yeah, and he said, what do you mean? I thought it was clear.
If only we'd heeded your advice, my friend. I, too, was baffled by that frequent reference.
Also, just so you know, I'm about to start the drying process.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, okay. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. But yeah. Wookiees, all of you look very stately and ominous. And I'm sure Nick would be happy to have you here.
Hey, did one of you remember to tell Megan? I think she was out picking up some groceries for us.
Oh, shit. She doesn't even know he's dead yet. Oh, man, this would have been a good part of the emotional closure for her. Oh, well, yeah, good catch, Joe Blobe. I'll let her know. Hold on. AJ, do you have any pens and sticky notes that I could borrow for a second?
Pens and sticky notes. Just one moment. Yes, I do in my quarters. Let me grab them for you. Here we are.
Thanks.
There's a pen and sticky
great.
notes.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to write her a quick note and put it on the door. Megan, Nick is dead. So sorry. We need more milk. XOXOXO. Heaton. Okay, got that covered there. So that takes care of that. And all right, let's kick off the funeral. How about? All right, AJ-19. Can you say something? Some words to mark the solemnity of this occasion?
Of course. This comes from a long line of droids before me. 11010011 101 1100 011 1001 0110 101.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Beautiful.
My emotional circuit board is overwhelmed.
Mine too. Thank you, AJ-19. There's nothing so pristine as King James binary. It's very, very moving. Joe Blobe, would you like to say anything about our fallen comrade Nick?
I'm okay.
All right, then. Looks like it's up to old Heaton to take up the slack. And I was gonna read some jokes from Uncle John's bathroom reader that we used to cap off Nick and Megan's wedding, but it just doesn't seem appropriate now. So I'll just speak from my heart. Let us commend Nick's lifeless corpse under the glowing spacehead god I decided to worship in the last episode. We can take solace in knowing that although Nick died from radiation burns while trapped inside of a transparent refrigerator, he died doing what he loved, quoting the Wrath of Khan. Nick was a proud man, born on the distant Italian homeworld. Of my friend, I can only say this. Of all the souls I've encountered in my travels, oh, for fuck's sake, Wolfwaro, we're at a funeral. Turn off your flip phone. Oh, it's Megan? Does she know about the whole being a widow thing? Trebecca texted her? Okay. All right, that's probably for the best. Oh, wait, hey, Wolfwaro, if she's still at the store, can you tell her we're out of milk? Well, I guess even our breakfast cereal has been affected by today's grim proceedings. Where was I? Oh, right, yeah, okay. Of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most human. Joe Blob, can you play us out with Amazing Grace like Scotty did at the end of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan?
Well, I can, Heaton, but I don't play bagpipes.
What do you play, like a guitar?
Well, I guess it would be called, like, the closest analog here on Earth is it's like a didgeridoo.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Well, that's the show. Thanks for listening, I guess. Thank you, Josh Jennings and Yonatan Huber, for providing stimulating and thoughtful conversation about how religion is portrayed in science fiction. Thanks, Jared Berman and Kevin Delano, for today's voices in the Vagabonding segment. And thank you, Nick Sperduti, wherever you are. Until next time, tally-ho!